All right, so chapter 15, part two, and really part two is just the Industrial Revolution. It's kind of what factories looked like at that time. And while American and French revolutions were encouraging political change, a different type of revolution was stirring in Europe. So it was an economic revolution. So not a revolution for rights, but this is actually an economic revolution. So the effects of the Industrial Revolution were just as far-reaching as the effects of the political revolutions that took place in America and France. The Industrial Revolution brought about fundamental changes in the way goods are made. It introduced mass production, so the large-scale production of identical goods over and over and over again, parts, things like that, and using new energies to meet humans' needs. So we start with water power, steam, coal, and then eventually get into the fossil fuels that we have today. So people started making goods in factories instead of at home for the first time, and they began to use steam power to start to run the machinery. So science also became more closely linked to technology, resulting in a stream of constant new innovation. So this is during a period of time of a lot of new inventions. So the causes of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution first began in Great Britain in the 1700s, where several important factors made Great Britain ready for the Industrial Revolution. One was its geographical advantages. Great Britain had many harbors, so it's an island. That's why it's going to have a lot of different harbors and things like that. It also had rivers that connected the cities to the harbors, and it had plenty of coal. Okay, so three major things. So in other words, they could move things around, and plus they had the coal to actually use in the factories. So as an island, it was protected from invasion. It's close to the European market, so they could sell their goods really quickly. And it was well located in trade with other areas. So really, Britain kind of becomes the center of the world once the Americas open up. Transportation and communication. Great Britain had well-developed coastal trade. They had been doing this the whole time since they're an island. They had canals, not the canals that we have. These are canals that actually boats use to transport things up and down rivers, things like that. They had port towns where it was easier to bring in products, things like that. They had an excellent postal service, which allowed them to really be able to send messages, maybe money, things like that. They had daily newspapers, and they had the most powerful navy in the world. So those are some of the different geographical and transportation reasons. And then, of course, it had a large colonial empire. So Britain's far-flung colonial empire brought a lot of these raw materials into her ports. So running a colonial empire contributed to the development of sophisticated financial and commercial skills. So they were able to have a lot of different banking institutions and things like that because they had to with this huge colonial empire that they had. And of course, the big thing is their innovations in textile and manufacturing. A series of British inventions then triggered the Industrial Revolution. Advances in science helped inventors take a practical approach to problems. The revolution began in the textiles and spread to other fields. For centuries, cotton and wool were protected and twisted on spinning wheels to make thread for yarn. So really the cotton industry is what caused Britain to explode in the Industrial Revolution. And here's some pictures of their canals. So here's some early boats, and they still use these canals today in different places in England to move different products around. So this is really their highways at the time. So it connected all the waterways, so towns to rivers and then to the ports. And of course, it's going to use the different types of resources they had, like coal, for their boats. And this is really the trade that England did with pretty much the entire world. So really most of your cotton and textile things came out of England and went to the rest of the world. All right, improvements in machines. So the spinning jenny in 1764 used a single wheel to control several spindles at a time. This replaced the single spindle on the conventional spinning wheel. So at home, you usually had just the one wheel, and you could make very little thread or yarn at once. But now you had several different, you can see over here, several different spindles, and then you would use the one wheel and make it a lot faster. So this allowed many threads to be spun at once, and larger quantities of threads could soon be made quickly and inexpensively. So the faster you made it, the cheaper it made it. So other similar inventions improved both spinning and weaving. James Watt, a Scottish inventor, improved the steam engine by creating separate chambers for the steam. One chamber would get hot, and then the other chamber would actually cool down. So he kind of made it a lot safer, is really what he did with the steam engine. So Watt's improved steam engine made steam power available for mechanical purposes. They could put it pretty much anywhere. His improvements allowed factory construction to be made anywhere. You didn't have to be next to water anymore. So really they had all their factories near running water, rivers that ran very quickly, could turn a wheel and then turn the machines on the inside. Now you could put your factory anywhere. So since factories were no longer dependent on water to power the machines, they could pretty much put them anywhere. And here's a picture of the steam engine, how it really, all it is you heat up the water, causes a lot of pressure, and it's actually going to make a piston move back and forth with this pressure going this way, and then the cooling coming back in and forcing it back out. And all it's going to do is actually make it move the arm of the piston, and that's how the machines worked. Same thing we have in our cars today, which we use gasoline. So the shift from home to factory. So really what happened is everything's met. Here's that spinning, the spinning wheel with one thread pretty much. So everything was made at home for a long period of time, and then it changes to factory made during the Industrial Revolution. So before the Industrial Revolution, craftsmen worked at home spinning wool, cotton, and linen by hand, and then weaving the thread or yarn into a finished cloth. Merchants often dropped off raw materials and collected the cloth. So they would drop off the cotton, come back a week later or whatever it is, and pick up the cloth that was finished. And this was known as the domesticated system. So the domestic system, which means doing things at home. So during the Industrial Revolution, large numbers of workers began working together in factories. So in factories, workers could be supervised and that's a big thing, they could be watched by their bosses, and could use machines driven by water and steam, eventually steam power. So the rate of production in the new factories was astonishing by the standards of the time. So as a result of the improvements, the price of the cloth decreased and the demand for textiles rose. So more people wanted to buy this cheaper cloth because they could afford it, because that's how cheap it became. And the faster, again, you do it, the cheaper it becomes. So raw cotton was imported into England, largely from the southern United States, with all our cotton fields. And in England, it was spun into thread and woven into cotton cloth in factories. From there, the cloth was shipped all over the world. So bring the raw material in, turn it into something extremely valuable, and then sell it back to the people who got you the raw material. And this, breakdown of the two different systems, the domestic system and the factory system, one done by hand, one done by machines, one done at home, one done in factories. So England's geographical advantages had plentiful supplies of coal and water. So this provided the resources needed for steam power to run the factories. Its engineer and craftsmen were skilled at making machines, so they invented a lot of different things. And as demand grew for less costly British textiles, more and more factories were built, employing greater numbers of workers. And this leads to really what caused the end or the change in the Industrial Revolution. So the working conditions. While factory owners grew richer and more powerful, the conditions of the working class actually got worse and worse and worse. So, you bring people in and actually they're living worse than what they did when they were out on the farms. So early factories were often appalling places to work with unsafe and unpleasant conditions. Working hours were long and workers barely received enough pay to live on. And a lot of them lived in factory apartments, so all of their rent went back to the factory. It was amazing. So women and children also work. There was no laws against children working. So children, since they were smaller, they were used to crawl in and clear the machines and dangerous tasks, which you see in these pictures up here at the top left. There was a lot of advantages to kids actually. Smaller, they ate less, and they could get into areas that adults couldn't get into. So in hard times, factory workers lost their jobs and were left to beg, steal, or get local poor relief or die of starvation. So you had a lot of wayward homes and things like that for workers who had lost their jobs, because there's no safety net, so there was no unemployment benefits and things like that. Once you lost your job, that was it. You were done. So they worked 6 days a week. They worked 16 hours a day. A lot of the kids worked in factories, and a lot of the diseases, such as lung disease, especially in the coal mines, were in the factories. And then, of course, you had extremely heavy, everything made back then was made out of metal and steel and things like that. So it was extremely, extremely hard. The work that they did was extremely hard. And this is a famous drawing of the time, and how at the top you had the factory owners pretty much giving everything. And then at the bottom, you have really all your workers. And in the background, you can see kids going through the coal mines, carrying the buckets of coal and things like that. And most of so capital and labor. So you have the very wealthy capitalists at the top, and then you have your workers down at the bottom. And these are some pictures of the time. So you can see how the machines take over. So instead of a wheel and a person working on it, these are all the insides of the threads. And then you have some kids working. Here's a young girl working. These are the famous breaker boys. So these are the kids that worked in the coal mines. This is how they dressed at the time. A lot of times, no shoes, things like that. This would all be in England, places like that, England, Ireland. Some girls from the time. And see their dresses, probably the only ones they had. And then here's some more boys working in the coal mines, and their lanterns were not electric or battery run or anything, so they would light them. And these are kids sifting through the coal as it's coming down a conveyor belt. All right, urbanization. So causing people to leave the farms or rural areas and come to the cities, so everyone became kind of urbanized. All right, so fewer workers were needed on the farms because of the improvements in agriculture. What happened is the machines, the tractors, the steam tractors started to come out on the farms. So with the shift of workers to factories, large numbers of workers moved from their farms and their homes into in the countryside, and they went to the cities. So the migration from rural communities to cities marked one of the largest population shifts in history. So cities became crowded, highly unsanitary. There was no restrictions on drinking water, anything like that. And factory smoke, of course, was everywhere. So no restrictions on pollution or anything. So here's a picture of an English city at the time. You can see it's just covered with pollution. And this is how crowded. I think this might be New York right here. How crowded it got with people coming into the cities.